It's really about how we spend our time and our resources to do the things that matter most to us. And if we're not doing that, we got to figure that out. Or we just waste this thing that we have called life, and we only get one.
Tim, I was thinking about my own journey of going through pharmacy school. I've shared before on this podcast, graduated in 2008, did a year of residency, felt like I was checking all the boxes, right? Got the degree, got the residency, finally landed into that good income that I was very much waiting for while I was in school. Eventually got the loans paid off, was saving and investing for the future. We bought our first house, right? All of the things were happening. Yet what I felt, and I suspect many of our listeners can relate to, there still was this sense of being overwhelmed on some level financially, somewhat disconnected to, why am I checking all these boxes? Where are we actually going? And unsure of, am I on track? And are the decisions that we're making financially actually the ones that we want to be making financially? Are they intentional with where we're trying to go and why we're trying to go there? And I think that can be a common situation, right? Where we're growing our income or even perhaps growing our net worth, but still feel like something is missing. And I think that something is missing is this connection to what we're talking about and getting some clarity around what does it mean to be living a rich life? And how do we ultimately develop a financial plan to support that? So let me start there. When you hear the phrase rich life, what does that mean to you? How would you define that?
Man, it's a great question. I think for me is like, I'm talking Tim Baker. I wake up, put pants on, go to the office. I think living a wealthy life today means like, am I spending like my day and my time and my resources how I want to? That's basically what it comes down to. And, I, when you were talking through this, I was thinking about, my upbringing and kind of how I traverse life. And then I'm thinking about like my kids. And we're in our 40s. So like, there's like levels to this, Tim. So like, let me break this down. Like I was taught, hey, you're a baker. We do good in school. Like you're going to get into the best college to hopefully get the best job. That means hopefully paying you a lot of money. And that's what we do, right? That's the expectation. And for the most part, I was very compliant to that. I fell in line, right? I didn't buck the trend out of the three of us. I have an older brother and a younger sister. I was probably the most rebellious out of the three, but I still colored within the lines, more or less. And I did those things. I did well in school. I got into a good school and then, started kind of my career, not necessarily in financial services to start, but then eventually pivot. But I would say pivoting into financial services for me, Tim, was coloring outside the lines a little bit because I left a 6-figure job with a great retirement, great benefits to basically start over again.
Yeah.
And start my own thing. And I, unlike you, I didn't come from a family of entrepreneurs. Like we were taught the safe thing to do is to latch on to a big company, make a good income, and hopefully maximize the benefits and retirement and all that kind of stuff. It's not to start from $0 of income and build from there. And, I think that when I was coloring in between the lines, so to speak, I don't want to say I was unhappy, but I wasn't really questioning my reality until things happened in my life where it forced me to question my reality. And that was more kind of on the personal side, less so on the professional side. So, I kind of distill this down as like, are the things that I'm doing in life, are they making me happy? Maybe is another way to put that. And again, like would I love to sit on the couch, drink bourbon, watch an Eagles game, work out and, not have a care in the world? Absolutely. That would be nice. But eventually I would get bored of that. But like you have to pay the bills, right? So there has to be a cross section where, you're a functioning member of society, but maybe you're the things that you're doing day in and day out, whether it's professionally, on the personal side, with family, passion projects, those have to be sprinkled in there too. Or if not, like, what's the point? So, so I think about that from my own perspective, but then I think about it from my kid's perspective. And I would say at least my oldest doesn't necessarily color in between the lines, right? Like some of the things I see her do, I'm like, I would just never do this, or I would never be disruptive in class, Tim. Like that would horrify me, right? Because of the expectation that was set. And I just wouldn't do that. And
Mama Baker not going to have that.
yeah, she ain't gonna have that. We're not having that. And, and I have to understand that, my kids are not going to be exactly like me, but also that like that doesn't just go for someone that's a preteen. That's like all the way through life. And then I kind of extrapolate that a little bit further of like the source of discontent that I see with younger people. So I'm thinking people that are maybe 10 or 15 years younger than us, Tim, is they've done all those things, right? They've gotten the degree, and the degree that they paid for it was more than the degree that you paid for it. And you came out with 6 figures of income, and salaries aren't going up, and home prices are way up, and interest rates are way up. And you're like, what the heck, mate? Like what? Like I've done all the things, right? And part of our financial success is timing. Like we just kind of came into the market at a good time. Not that it was easy, but you look at it today, and that's why you kind of see some of this discourse between like baby boomers and millennials and Gen Z is, like where we are at. And not to say like baby boomers didn't have, I mean, we had, crises and things like that. Like when you live in the Cold War and there's that just dark feeling of like the world could be over tomorrow. That's a different level of stress. But what my point is that, if you're coming out now, the cards are kind of stacked against you in a lot of ways. And then you overlay AI and things like that. So I know this is kind of a rambling question, but I think like, the way that I kind of distill this down is, are the things that I'm doing in life, the way I'm spending my time, the way I'm spending my resources, things that drive me, that make me happy, that, can sustain a life that I love and I feel comfortable in. And if it's not, then what am I doing about it? And I would say for a long time, I would, if I wasn't happy, or, I probably for a long time, like I lived life unexamined. I just did the things I did because that was what I expected. And I was always a critical thinker, but maybe not necessarily on a personal level of like where I wanted to go to school or what career I got into. And, I think it took major, ups and downs in my life, probably more so the downs, that really caused me to take a breath and, reflect on the things that I was doing in my life and calibrate them more towards what I wanted to do, not what was expected of me.
So glad that you mentioned just the reality that people are coming out in today.
Yeah.
Right? 'Cause I think the risk we run in this conversation, just to put it on the table, is it's a privileged conversation. Let's call it for what it is, right? This concept of being able to have the flexibility of time and or resources, you mentioned both of those things, right? To on some level have choice of what you're doing, not to diminish the hard work you put in or I put in to get there. I'm certainly gonna, it's important we recognize that it wasn't, an easy road, and there was hard work that got put in to get there, and we need to honor that work. But it's a privileged conversation, and one that we believe is really, really important. But there may be people listening that whatever the circumstances are, and especially noting those that are coming out today, like, hey, this is a great conversation, but I'm grinding. Like I'm grinding, right? I've got, the average student loan debt. We talk about it all the time, $175,000, right? Market. I bought my first house in 2011, Tim, for $176,500, 4-bedroom house. That doesn't exist, right, in the market. We've got 4 kids that are very, very expensive, but the costs, certainly, my soon to be 15-year-old, like obviously those costs are going up over time, and having kids today is more expensive than it was when we had our oldest in 2011, and on and on and on. And so as we talk about this concept of living a rich life, I do still think it's very relevant regardless of where you're at in stage of career, because even when you're grinding, it can be a source of, motivation and something that we're looking towards and pointing towards as a North Star. But it is worth acknowledging that, there are a lot of steps that need to be put into place before we're talking about this conversation of autonomy of time and resources, of what we can do with that. I do want to though ask, I mean, unexamined really jumped off the page to me when you said that, Tim, because I feel the same way when I look back at my own journey. The way I think about it is there was very much an outside in type of approach that I was having to my financial plan, meaning that it was, making financial decisions unexamined or without much thought, or because this is what a pharmacist should be doing, or a home that I should be able to afford, right? Or how I should be saving or investing, doing all these different types of things, versus I think the conversation we're having around defining what it means to be living a rich life and hopefully putting a financial plan around that supports it. That's very much an inside out type of approach versus an outside in, right? We're directing, what does it mean to us individually? Why do we care about this topic of money? What are we hoping to accomplish or achieve? And from there, we build the inside out to then make financial decisions based off of those values or based off of those, types of characteristics that we define, which probably will change also over time.
Absolutely will
And
change. Yeah.
hopefully from there, we get the outcomes that we want. Now, with that said, when you said unexamined, the first thought to my mind was, well, when did that shift happen? Right? Like, I'm curious to hear your thoughts, but for me, I remember vividly when my oldest Sam was born in 2011, like time could have stood still at that moment, right? Like life was different before and after Sam, in terms of like this conversation, of flexibility of time and being able to build a financial plan that we can have experiences as a family and not feeling like we're in that constant state of stress, right? All of that came to a different level of color when we had our oldest Sam. I'm curious for you, like when you say that living a rich life is in part, having some autonomy over your time, over your resources, over how you're spending your days. Like when did that shift happen, or how did that evolution take place?
So, to be extremely vulnerable, for me, my wake up moment probably came right before, like right before I turned 30. Um, I was I was in a relationship. I was living in Columbus, but then I took a job in California, and I was in a long-term relationship, probably 9 years engaged. And I think that we were living separately, and I was the mindset that I had been in for a number of years was to really put my head down and climb the corporate ladder, whatever that looked like, to kind of justify my existence. So what do I mean by that? So my path is kind of odd in the sense that I graduated from West Point in 2005, but my military career never really took off because I was hurt and I was injured. And this was like right in the middle of two theater war, Afghanistan, Iraq. A lot of my classmates were going over there. A lot of them didn't come back in one piece. And I just had this. So like, as I was being medically boarded out because of the injury that I sustained during a training exercise, like I don't know if it was survivor guilt, depression. Like I just felt like failure. And, to me, the answer to that was not to deal with that, but to bury that and, kind of build my resume up to kind of justify the education and the path, so like if I'm managing, I got into logistics. So if I'm managing an apartment of 300 people, which, I think at the time when I started, it was like 100 people, like that's like a company command, right? When I'm, 5 years in or whatever. So my whole mindset was that and nothing else. So nothing health wise, nothing really even relationship wise. And, at the time, like I was just driving my partner at the time away. And when that relationship ended, not by my choice, it was almost like being like awoken from like a nightmare, and
Yeah.
I'm, just examining myself. I was a ghost of myself, really.
Mhm.
So for me, that kind of reinvention of myself, um, really started there. And, I kind of, in that place and time in my life, I really, really broke down like the things that I would do. Like, will this make me happy? Or is this gonna add versus subtract? And it kind of took me completely stepping away for a better part of a year, um, from life, really from like my career, to figure out what that was and what I
Yeah.
wanted to do. Um, and then really thinking about what I wanted to do. And, I actually landed on financial advisor, financial planner, which might sound weird to somebody, but I had this moment where I mentioned my brother and my sister who are, they're 4 years apart and I'm in the middle. And, I would say they talk, but not regularly, but probably within a span of 48 hours, as I was kind of like narrowing it down to a number of profession, and I was talking to them and seeking counsel. Like both of them had said like, "Hey, we really think that you should go this route because of these reasons. You're a great teacher. People trust you. They like you. We think that would be good for you." And I'm like, I think this is the universe, telling me something. And I kind of decided to pivot that way and, work for another firm, but really was continue to work on myself, outside of the professional side. So, you know, um, that was, so that kind of happened, before I turned 30, or as I was turned 30 into my early 30s.
Hmm.
Um, that it really, is like I was never going to allow like my career or that expectation of what I should be doing or the pressure that I put on myself to dictate, my actions. And I feel like for a long time I did. And that was a choice too. Like I felt all the emotions and things because of, the accident that I had. But to me, that's kind of what it boils down to. And, for me, like I haven't looked back from that. And, did I work a lot when I was starting out, especially when I started Script Financial? Absolutely. But I always kind of make the joke is like it never felt like work, whereas everything before this has always felt like work. And there was ups
Yeah.
and downs, and you put the time in. But one of the things I'm proud of is like we've built this company over 10 years, and like we've worked hard, but like I'm not working 80 hours a week.
Yeah.
I'm not like I'm home for dinner every night. Like I'm not necessarily working. I'm not working weekends. And I don't think I've ever gotten into this deep of detail like on the podcast. But for me, like when we talk about living a wealthy life, like I take that to heart because for a good decade of my life, it was really by someone else's sheet of
Yeah.
music, I would say.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting, we obviously have two very different journeys, but the common thread that's coming up for me is, and centers around the topic here is, we spend so much time building the career or the life that was what we thought was supposed to be what we want or what we should have done. And then there's a moment or a series of moments or life events or things that happen that kind of shake us to get to this point of asking, is all that I'm building actually aligning with the life that I want to live? Right. And what are those things that are most important to me or to my family? And how do we arrive at that, decision? And I very much, like you in your journey, I even think about the decision going to pharmacy school and even the hours I spent in pharmacy school and the decision to do residency. All of it has served a really important path going into the academic space and, working crazy hours to publish articles and get promoted and all that. I mean, I don't regret any of that, but it was very much an outside in type of living. I was living my day in and out of, expectations of what I should be doing. And then life happens and it's like, wait a minute, are all these things that I've been building and all the boxes that I've been checking, am I actually living the life that I want to live? And then you peel back the onion and well, what does that actually mean? Right. And how do we define what that is? You have a lot of conversations, with prospective clients, Tim. And so I'm just curious from those conversations, even thinking about one here in the last couple of weeks of, clients that are coming on board that are in the middle of their career, and kind of at that point of like, hey, we've been doing this for a while now, and it feels a little bit like a grind, and maybe we want to make some different decisions or have some flexibility or autonomy of our time. And we've got a young family and we want to treasure this season of life and not just let it pass by. So what are the moments that you typically hear that lead to this transition point? And again, not a singular event always, but what are those things? Because I think for some people it could be very early in their career. For other people, it might be that they're nearing retirement. And, some of these deeper questions are coming to the surface and everything in between. Like what are those life events that typically get people to this point of asking some of these questions around what does it actually mean to be living my rich life?
Yeah, I mean, some recent conversations that you kind of alluded to is, centered around things like, man, I kind of like what you were saying, like I've been working and saving, my whole life, my whole career, I'm kind of maybe approaching the midway part or right there. I'd love to retire early, but I don't really know what that looks like. And, comments like, I'm working my rear end off, but we're not spending enough time or money on the things that like today, like I'm not enjoying life today. And that's it's heartbreaking to hear, Tim, I think the positive side of that is like they've recognized that, right? Whereas, and I always tell this analogy, and I don't know if it's a great or this, I don't know if the analogy, the story, I don't know if it's a great one, but when I was in logistics, I would get to the warehouse, the office at 5 o'clock in the morning. I leave at 5 o'clock at night, 30-minute drive each way in the dark. I would drive there, work all day, drive home. I couldn't tell you the drive. I couldn't remember any of the drive. It was just autopilot.
Yeah.
And I think that can be life if you don't stop and ask these questions. So I think like for some of these couples that I talk to, they have asked these questions. They've come to that realization of like, hey, something is not right and we need to make a change. And I think a good jumping off point for those changes, obviously, is to get on the same page with your spouse, but then it's also look at your finances and say like, do we have room for me to go part-time so I can spend more time with our son or our daughter? Can I be a stay-at-home mom or a stay-at-home dad? Like, is that in the cards? Like, how's that going to affect the long term? And, I think with a little bit of planning, you'd be surprised what you can accomplish. Things that you might think impossible, when we actually project things out, are like they're doable. And, so it is things like, kind of get into that stage of your career where like, man, I've been doing this for 10, 15, 20 years. Like, what am I doing? It could be having kids, like you said. One of the crystallizing moments for me, and I've talked about this in the past, is, when we were kind of looking at, we've been saving, for a while, and we were looking at potentially buying like another rental property, and we've been talking about our motorhome, and I'm like, well, maybe we should just wait for retirement. And then I'm like, I was just thinking about our family, and I'm like, man, like with our oldest, I forget how old she was at the time, but like we only have 6 years, 8 years of like where mom and dad are cool and we can travel in close proximity. That is so fleeting, right? So like once I said that to my wife, she's like, let's do it, right? So like it could be things like that, right? So, it could be just a big trip, or maybe it is a big promotion. I think for me, I thought about like, again, I told my story and kind of trying to climb the corporate ladder and get promoted and make more money and bonus and things like that. And the picture I have in my head, it's almost like a Wile E. Coyote like cartoon where I'm the coyote or I'm somebody and I'm on like a mountainside and I'm running along like a curved cliff and there's a carrot in front of me and I just can't get it. And I'm just like, I'm not going over the edge. I'm just, and that's like, that's how I pictured my life, so it could be empty nesters, that kind of like, okay, what do we do now? It could be, hey, I'm transitioning away from full-time work. Like my identity and role as a pharmacist, they're kind of not melded anymore. So it's different for everyone. And I think obviously the sooner the better. My brother calls this like being switched on. That's kind of his parlance, like kind of really introspective of the things around you and kind of, like plugged in. But in this case, I think if you think about Matrix, it's almost like you're unplugging yourself, right? But I would say those are some of the things that have come up in terms of like, hey, this is kind of the light bulb moment, the aha moment, for me to say, to examine at least, am I doing the things that I want to do? And if I'm not, like, what am I doing about it? And that can be a very scary conversation to have with yourself. It could be
Yeah.
a very scary conversation to have with your spouse. Like, hey, been an engineer my whole life. Now I want to be a pilot. Like, what? Like that doesn't compute. And it could be a scary thing to kind of open yourself up to a financial planner if you get that far, right? So these conversations are not easy because it often leads to, at least in my situation, to unlearn the things that I've learned. And I've even heard, people in my family, my kids, my nieces and nephew kind of espouse that, like, I need to get the highest paying job because that's what success is. And it really isn't. Does it help things out? Yeah, it does. But if you're making $200,000 and your net worth is $3 million and you're miserable, what is
Right.
the freaking point?
Yeah.
What's the point? Right. So, and it's kind of it's kind of like, I watch, Scrooge, I watch that every year. It's kind of the tale as old as time, is like, wealth is not ones and zeros in your bank account. It's not. It's part of the equation, yes. But it's really about how we spend our time and our resources to do the things that matter most to us. And if we're not doing that, we got to figure that out. Or we just waste this thing that we have called life, and we only get one.
Yeah. When you said unlearning some of this, Tim, it was reminding me of something that I'm working through in real time, like in my 40s, like unlearning. And I think pharmacy school is probably, if I could put some blame somewhere, like partly responsible for this, of like, I have over time developed this belief that if I'm not working my butt off, if I'm not working hard and grinding, like I'm not of value, right? That's a story that I've learned over many, many, many years. And so unlearning that, and this very much connects to living a rich life in the financial plan, unlearning that, it's very real. And, the visual that's coming to mind as you were describing yours is the myth of Sisyphus. And it's almost like I'm pushing that boulder up a hill, or trying to, and not being very successful. And all the while it's like, I'm on the wrong hill. Like I don't even need to be on that hill. Like it's a totally different hill. And what I've realized, it's like, I had this belief in my mind that in order to, live your rich life, be financially independent, whatever you're going to call it, is it was going to require huge amounts of dollars. And it's like, I've asked some of the questions of what does it mean to be living my own rich life? It doesn't often take a ton of financial resources, or not even what I would have expected it to be. So for example, for our family, one of the things we've identified is, like, we love going to sporting events as a family. Like, and some of these are a splurge, right? It's like, hey, we're going to go to the local, professional soccer team. We're going to sit front row, but the splurge might be $300, $400. And I don't take that for granted, but that isn't changing the trajectory of our net worth or the progress we're making on other goals. But it wasn't until, and you played a huge role in this, it wasn't until really more concretely defining, like, what are the things that are most important and what do they actually cost? And what's the opportunity cost of not investing in them? It wasn't until getting to that level of detail that there was almost the permission to, like, see it for actually what it is. I was even thinking about a moment this past weekend where I was out on the driveway playing with the boys, and we like to play wiffle ball, baseball in the driveway. And I was like, give me the ball, right? Let me have the ball. And so I started throwing as hard as I could. I mean, as hard as I could. We've got like a backstop, so we're not arguing over strikes and balls.
Don't tear your Achilles, Tim. Please don't.
I know,
tear
right?
Yeah.
2.0. It's going to be rotator cuff. Yeah. So we're not arguing over strikes and balls. If it hits the backstop, it's a strike, right? So I told them, I said, hey, each of you are going to get 3 strikes. All right. If any one of you hits this full speed, it was a tennis ball, full speed tennis ball. Any one of you, we're going out and getting Frosties like tonight. That's the deal. All right. Yeah. So we go from youngest to oldest, right? So every bro is trying to establish credibility with the other bros. So we go, Bennett, he actually comes really close, doesn't get one. And then Everett had a shot, and then Levi, cranks one, and they are screaming in the neighborhood, right?
Levi got a hold of one.
Levi got a hold of
man.
one, screaming in the
They're
neighborhood,
like jumping around,
and
man,
so we
awesome.
go get the Frosties, and I think the bill was $12.50 or whatever.
Best Frosty they ever tasted.
Totally, and it's like these are the moments, like these are the things that we're going to be talking about, and I think it's really getting clear on, like, what does this mean for you, right? The inside out versus the outside in. And then how do we develop the plan to actually support that? And what does that mean for the rest of the financial plan, right? I'm thinking of another couple where, they love to travel. And I talked with them a couple weeks ago, and, the goal is, hey, we want to take 5 to 6 trips per year in retirement. Traveling is our rich life, but we also want to make sure and feel confident we can do it with the peace of mind that we're not going to run out of money.
Right.
And just having the plan around that to support it, to enjoy those things without the stress or the worry, I think is really the value. And so what are for somebody who's listening, I'm thinking of a couple groups of people, someone who says, hey, I know what my rich life is, but I'm just in the grind right now. And it's kind of head down to build these foundational blocks so I can eventually lift my head up. But then there's others that might be hearing this saying, I'm not sure, right? I don't know what that is, or I haven't, given the space to allow these questions to come to the surface. What are 1 or 2 questions that you could throw out there that would help people start to just go a little bit deeper or layer deeper of what might be these things for them individually?
Yeah. So I think, we go through this in our 3rd meeting on the roadmap, script your plan, and we go through the Kinder 3 questions, which we have talked about in the past, to kind of build the foundation for this conversation. So the first question on the 3 questions is, let's assume that you're financially secure, that, all your needs are taken care of today and in the future. What would you do? What would you be? And really allow the space to dream a little bit. And we talk through that. We give each partner kind of the space to express themselves. I think this is better. We kind of do it like this, virtually, and kind of we give our clients the questions that I think allows them to think through it. I think the best scenario when I do kind of a deeper dive in life planning with certain clients is to actually sit in a quiet room and write these down, because I think you can really reflect. But then we move to the question of like, okay, now let's assume we're at your current level of wealth, but you have 5 to 10 years left to live. You don't know when you'll pass away within those 5 to 10 years. You'll be healthy enough to do the things that you want to do in that time frame. But we're putting a time limit on your life. And how does that change your answers? What would you do? What would you be? And then we kind of transition to hey, you found out today that, today's your last day, and this is less about like, what would you do on your last day, and more of a reflection on what did you miss? What did you not yet become? And really zero in on this question. Right. And, I think the interesting thing about having done probably hundreds of these types of meetings, is that last question, it's not a money question at all, really. And really a lot of the content of the answers are not money questions. So, we talk about living a wealthy life today and a wealthy life tomorrow. And I think because we're financial planners, the assumption is that we're talking about being a 7-figure pharmacist and making that 6-figure income and all that good stuff. And, we've kind of talked about, there should be balance between that and the qualitative stuff of like, man, if today was my last day, like I wish I would have spent more time with my dad and with my mom. I wish I would have spent more time with my kids. I wish I would have took that trip, to Australia that I've been talking about for 10 years and I've never done. So there's resources and, so there are resources involved with this.
Yeah.
It's your time. It's your plane ticket. It's all that stuff. But it's actually not a lot, right? It's not. And, to me, the questions are designed to really dig deep. And it's not like, oh, like, what are your goals for your investment portfolio? Or like, what do you think you're going to do in retirement? Like, that's boring, right? And it's very surface. Like, we want to go deep. Um, and I think it's a place that you have to be comfortable with, right? You have to be, vulnerable, maybe out of your comfort zone. And, we tell clients, like, when we kick off our relationship, the more you share with us, the better we can serve
Yeah.
you, and,
Yeah.
I think sometimes people are hesitant to work with financial planners because they don't want to be judged, right?
Mhm.
Like, maybe their dream is not to be, a pharmacist. Maybe their dream is to be a singer or an artist or something like that. Um, I think that's great. At the end of the day, I want you to be passionate about what you're doing. And I want to make sure that you're okay financially as well, right? Like, those are things. But, I would say this quantitative and qualitative balance, I don't think it is a balance. I think it's
Yeah.
the qualitative things that matter most. We happen to be professionals in the
Mhm.
quantitative, and we want to make sure that. But the conversation is often driven somewhere else. So I think our job as we work with clients is to examine the balance sheet and kind of take that snapshot of where they're at financially. It's to ask those deeper questions about their life plan and position the financial plan to support that, and then to hold you accountable to that, right? So, I make the joke that, you know, um, when I got into bourbon, there's nowhere in my financial plan or in my goal setting that I need to lead the league in bottles of bourbon, right? But if you look at some of my spending, especially, as I got into it, I'm like, oh man, I'm spending more money on that than I need to, right? It's it's for me, it's more about, are you having those experiences with your family? And like you said that you need to, like, are you doing daddy-daughter date night? Are you
Yep.
calling your brother and seeing how he's doing and playing Xbox and catch up with him? Are you going on date night with your wife? Are you doing bro night with Liam? All of those things, like, those cost money and time,
Yeah.
but they're not necessarily major needle movers in regard to that. So I think our job in life is to hold up the mirror. So in my case, hey Tim, like, nowhere in your financial plan does it say you need to lead the league in bourbon bottles, but that's where you're spending a lot of your resources. Maybe let's do some of these other things that you've talked about. And if those things are not important anymore, which things change, right? There's seasons of life, things that I would have, thought 10 years ago, I'm like, I'm not even concerned about that anymore. I would just say, hey, I don't, that's not a passion of mine anymore. And that's okay. So what are those passions? And let's
Yeah.
redirect the plan to that, right? Because we're not static, and it's not about a plan, it's about planning. And
Mhm.
to me, I think coupling that introspection with the actual implementation of the plan is really, really important.
Yeah, I think, you're talking about the quantitative, qualitative, and people often come to us with the quantitative questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Am I on track for retirement? When should I make a claiming decision around Social Security? Should I do Roth conversions? Do I have the right
Yeah.
asset allocation? All these technical questions. And just to be clear, as you said, right, what we're suggesting is that those are table stakes for what a financial plan should be doing. All those questions are worthwhile questions that need to be answered. What often doesn't get enough attention is everything else that we're talking about here. Because at the end of the day, the whole purpose of the plan is to support these other areas that we're talking about.
Right.
And I'm convinced that while people come with the technical questions, the reason they stay and will remember the work that we're doing will be to really lean into the qualitative side of the plan, right? So, when we look ahead and it's all said and done, and we look backwards, we're not going to remember the Roth conversions. We're not going to remember, did we optimize the asset allocation and rebalance the portfolio? Whatever is the
You
technical
max out your
question.
401k, right? You're not gonna,
Yeah.
like, that's not gonna be the things on your deathbed. And I don't know if you've ever watched this, Tim. I'll see sometimes these videos on YouTube where someone will be in the street with a microphone and they'll
Yeah.
They'll be on the street and they'll interview someone that is obviously a little bit longer in the tooth and, maybe in their 80s or 90s or whatever. And they'll ask questions of like, what would you have done differently? And, very often it's like, man, I wouldn't have worked so much or worked so hard. Or I would have, maybe retired earlier or traveled while I was more able-bodied or, you
Yeah.
know, you know, so yeah, like the things that we stress out about, are they important? Yeah, of course they're important, right? And I think, having a plan to examine, the way the pharmacist's brain, well, the way humans kind of operate, they just want to know if they're okay,
Yeah.
right? I think the way the pharmacist's brain works, they want to know they're okay, but then they want to see the data that shows that they're okay, right? And I feel like that's a major gap with most financial planners is they'll look at it and be like, Tim, you're
You're
okay.
okay.
And, for some people, they're like, hey, I like the binary up or down. Like, that's good with me. A lot of pharmacists are like, okay, but like, show me that I'm
Show
okay.
me.
And that's the work that we do is like, all right, if we want to do 5 trips a year and that budget is 30 grand or whatever the heck it is, let's take 30 grand per year out of the plan and we'll see how that changes things,
Yeah.
right? We'll do our 10,000, simulations and we'll show you, all right, we were at an 84% success rate that we're going to have money in the plan at the end, age 95. Now we're at a 81% with that or whatever it is. And then are there other things that we can adjust? So this is really the nerdy, maybe scratching a pharmacist's, itch in terms of like seeing the data and how things balance and things like that. I think a lot of financial planners are just like, you're good, right? And if we're not good, we'll adjust, but we're kind of just, sticking our finger in the air and being like, okay, I think we're okay. Like we want to actually show the data. And again, we don't have a crystal ball. We can't predict the future, the market, the economy, things like that. But we can get pretty darn close with, just running multiple simulations and what that looks like. So I think for the pharmacist, they like that, right? And, if I can be told I'm okay and then overlay more of the qualitative stuff to that, that's transformation,
Yeah.
right? That's where
Yeah.
the magic happens, right? And to your point, like you're not, our clients are like, oh, they're not going to say like, oh, on their deathbed, I'm so glad that Tim Baker told me to maximize my Roth IRA in episode 200 of the YFP podcast. It's going to be more like, I'm just glad that I took that trip or
Yeah.
I had the experiences with my family. And to your point, and I want to comment on this, like, and our brains are both built this way, I think. But like that wiffle ball Frosty, that's like core memory, right?
Core memory.
And I can see the boys jacking each other up and, jumping around and being excited by that. And I think the way that our brains work is, and we, in our core values, like we celebrate wins because the way that we're wired is like we achieve something and a lot of pharmacists will you just on to the next thing. You don't even like take in the fact that, whatever it is, it's like, I just accomplished this. I just, got through pharmacy school, passed my boards, got this promotion. The way that you and I are wired, it's like, well, we expected that. So it's on to the next thing. And no, like we really should stop, acknowledge that and be grateful for that.
Yeah.
Right. And for I think we do a much better job than when we first started doing this 10 years ago. Cause I think we recognize it's a weakness of ours and we build it into our culture and we kind of force that. And it's not forced, like it's kind of second nature now, but like that little, time that you spent and dollars that you spent will, in the words of the Gladiator, echo into eternity because it's just awesome. Like, it's just like, the day, oh man, I hit my dad's heater and this is the tastiest Frosty ever. Right. And like those are the moments, right, to your point. And they're so freaking fleeting and you don't want to miss that. Right. So, I just want to say that out loud because I think that you know, so much of this conversation can be centered around, we talk about this with the phases of life and financial plan. It's like, you don't arrive anywhere. There's no arrival. It's just the next chapter in the book. Even when you go, I think so much in financial services is like, I'm 65, I'm retiring, like I've arrived. And then you get there and you're like, what did I do? Or like, what am I
Yeah.
doing? Or who
Yeah.
am I? And so, I think about this with Zoe, who's 2, you know, I, it seems like every week or every month, there's something that she is no longer doing that we'll never have again because
Phase.
we're not having
Yeah.
kids anymore. Right. And part of me is exhausted and being like, oh, great. Like, we don't have to worry about that anymore. But part of me is like, man, she's not a baby anymore. She's becoming a person and she has her own opinion. And so, like, and that's every stage of life, right? Like, some people really struggle when their kids, leave and they're empty nesters. Some people really struggle when they transition from working 40 hours a week or 50 hours a week to like, now they're not, and they're not the big cheese or, the boss or things like that. So, it's just, being content where your feet are. And, I think that's part of, living a wealthy life today.
And to echo what you said, right? There is no ride, with the
Right.
financial plan. And I've been reminded of that over and over again, first starting with the journey to pay off the student loans and then achieving certain investing goals or other
Net
types of goals
worth
along the
and
way. Yeah, there is no ride. I will say the closest thing I think to what I've experienced as arrived is what you're talking about, is to actually slow down in those moments, to feel those moments, to reflect on those moments and to lock them in. I mean, what Bill Perkins talked about in Die with Zero is the experience dividend, right? Like if we can actually be present to slow down and experience those in that moment, that is the rich life in those moments, to actually feel those and experience those and to remember those, over time.
yeah.
And as we wrap up, I made a list here of some categories for our listeners to think about if they're, trying to get some ideas of what might this mean for them individually. And again, everyone's situation different, right? So it could be time freedom. It could be,
Hmm.
having some control over calendar or an option to work less or take a sabbatical or part-time off. It could be some additional flexibility, changing roles, relocating, maybe leaving a less than ideal job situation. It could be an investment around health, physical health, mental health, relationships and family, quality time with family, being present, being closer to family, if that's a priority. It could be experiences, often is experiences that we hear, travel, hobbies, creating memories, could be giving back, volunteering, mentoring, right? All of these things, again, some of the questions that you outline are really there to not tell anyone what should be their rich life, to help them reflect upon that and to self-discover it so that we can then build the financial plan to support it. And at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do with the financial plan. Can we get clear on what it means to be living our rich life today and tomorrow? It's not a one and done. This isn't Kentucky basketball, right? We're going to continue to evaluate this over time. That may change, likely will change. And then how do we evolve the financial plan to support that rich life along the way? Tim Baker, great stuff, as always. And we'll be back at it here in a couple of weeks.
I look forward to it, Tim. Thanks.
Thanks. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Scripted Wealth, Money and Meaning for Pharmacists. If you enjoyed the conversation, be sure to subscribe, leave us a rating and review, and share the show with a friend or colleague. It really helps more pharmacists discover the show and join us on the journey toward living a rich life today and tomorrow. And if today's episode got you thinking about your own financial plan, retirement goals, or what a rich life means for you, we'd love to help. You can learn more about our fee-only comprehensive financial planning services by visiting yfbwealth.com. And finally, an important reminder that the content in this podcast is provided to you for informational purposes only and is not intended to provide and should not be relied on for investment or any other advice. Information of the podcast and corresponding material should not be construed as a solicitation or offer to buy or sell any investment or related financial products. For more information, you can visit yfbwealth.com/disclaimer. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great rest of your week.